I think energy efficiency has a very important role to play. After all, it's one of the three key performance indicators, if you will, that the EU has set itself in order to monitor the progress towards its ambitious climate policy goals. But having said that, it's also clear that energy efficiency improvements alone cannot guarantee carbon emissions reductions. And that's because energy efficiency improvements can be offset in part or in a large part by economic growth or by the rebound effect. So given that, it's clear that energy efficiency plays an important role, but it cannot be our only strategy to tackle climate change. I think I would suggest two changes. One change refers to the prices. I think the prices for energy should reflect the true cost to society of using energy, and that would include not only the production costs, but also the external cost that energy use imposes on society through climate change. So that means doing away with subsidies, implicit and explicit subsidies to energy prices, and including externality pricing for CO2 and other greenhouse gases in the energy price. The other thing that I would suggest would be to foster research and development into more efficient ways of using energy. It's clear from an economist's point of view that the private sector will not do enough research and development when left to its own devices, and that's because the returns to such R&D cannot fully be appropriated by the private sector. So one conclusion from that is that the state has to step in and probably has to subsidize research and development into energy efficiency. I think like a general insight is that, a very general insight is that firms respond to incentives, right? So policies that put a price on CO2 emissions have led to, and that's empirically established, to firms reducing CO2 emissions. Policies that put a price on electricity have led to firms reducing electricity use. So that's good because it shows us that firms are willing and in a position to internalize the externalities associated with energy use, and that leads to more efficient resource use and less pollution. But there's also a downside to that, because firms also have an incentive to lobby for exemptions from such pricing policies, CO2 pricing or energy pricing. And this is based on the argument that these policies lead to higher costs for firms that compete in international markets, that the higher costs and the associated competitive disadvantage leads to a loss of market share, a loss of employment. That's an argument often made in order to justify such compensation. The important point, or one important lesson from the empirical analyses that we have, is that there's hardly any evidence that the existing policies have led to competitive disadvantages of regulated firms. I mean, the theoretical point is well established, but we don't have the evidence. So based on that, and that's another takeaway from the literature, we should be applying greater scrutiny when it comes to handing out compensation to polluting firms, because it's taxpayers' money that's used for that, and we should, have a really compelling case for handing out those subsidies. Yes, so the ETS has led to mostly adoption of more energy efficient technologies and or low carbon technologies. So technology adoption is something that we've seen in the data. So that means also like the adoption of existing and commercialized technologies. With respect to the invention and commercialization of new technologies, we have very little evidence. In fact, the most optimistic study that I'm aware of finds a positive but very small effect on patent applications for clean technologies. So here it's clear that we haven't seen the big push in low carbon technologies that would be required to get us on course with our ambitious climate policy targets. But on the other hand, we shouldn't be surprised to not see that much of an effect of the ETS, because the prices have been very, quite low until very recently. And also we have some of the most emissions-intensive sectors, such as transportation and residential energy use, that are not even covered by the ETS.